Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Waystation Season 2. I'm your host, Rebecca Darren Ellis, nobody in particular, and also just like you. In every episode of the Waystation, we explore first-person stories, each told on a common theme, but from vastly diverse perspectives. We'll introduce you to everyday, real people whose lives are seemingly different than yours. Or are they? Perhaps through these stories, you may find that you and me and he and she and they and them are more alike than we're willing to admit. And now thank you to those that make this show possible, my friends at Pioneering Collective. This podcast is powered by Pioneering Collective, an executive thought leadership firm combining personal PR, coaching, and networking to transform hard-earned wisdom into heavyweight impact. Learn more at pioneeringcollective.com. Food, glorious food. I used to be a musical theater kid. So there's a lot of complicated issues surrounding the topic of food and a lot that get me real fired up. And I could talk about them ad nauseum. To name a few, food deserts. The fact that companies put sugar in their foods to make you addicted to them. How every other day there is a new food that's considered a superfood and then another that's demonized. Diet culture. That's a big one. The overconsumption of meat and dairy. Please note that I am not vegan, and the impact that has on climate change and the lack of education to the general public about this. So trust me, I could keep going. The truth is there is a lot of ways that we could talk about food here at the Waystation, and I think we could do an entire episode tackling it from every single angle. But the above ways that I listed here, we will speak of none of them today. Not a one. In fact, we're going to talk about all the glories of food, of a meal, the ways that we enjoy food, our most memorable moments with food, how food is a shared experience, how food is nourishing, how we can show our love for others with food. Yes, that's right. Today, we will talk about all the good stuff. So joining me in the Waystation, I have two fellow food lovers, Caitlin Sakdalan and Emily Cornell, two very real people with very real, really honest, very true stories about their best moments with food. I hope you can relate. I'm so excited to welcome into my Waystation today Caitlin Sakdalan and Emily Cornell, two very cool women with stories about their best moments with food. I hope that you all are able to relate. We're going to start off with Caitlin today, but first a little bit about Caitlin. She is an influential food and travel content creator, as well as a social media strategist, born and raised in New Jersey and currently living in Manhattan. Caitlin, whenever you're ready, I would love to explore your best meal and your relationship to food.
Yeah, of course. Rebecca, thank you for having me on today. And Emily, so great to be on this podcast with you. A lot of people always ask me what my favorite or best meal is, and I try to avoid that answer because it's so hard. There are so many memorable meals in life, but one that I think about specifically was in DC at a restaurant called Bad Saint. But I kind of want to back up a little bit because that didn't start at Bad Saint, and there's kind of a lot of context behind that meal and why it was so important to me. So in 2019, it was December, I had visited the Philippines right before, I guess, the height of the pandemic. And I stayed in Asia for about a month and a half. I went across kind of the Philippines, Thailand, across the different islands. And that's when I met Tom Cunanan. He is a James Beard winning chef. And he, at the time, was head chef of Bad Saint in DC. And it's a Filipino restaurant. And for me, I have always loved food. It has always been kind of a huge part of my life, especially Filipino food, because being first generation Filipino American, it's always been a big part of my everyday life. I ate rice almost every single day growing up. And I've always loved it. I've always loved introducing my friends to it. Try these noodles, try this dish. And that has always brought me and my family a lot of joy. And so to see a restaurant on kind of one of those kind of well-recognized and revered lists, and to see a Filipino chef win an accolade like that, I was filled with pride. And I had never met Tom before then, and I always celebrated him from afar. But by happenstance, we actually met in the Philippines. So back in 2017, I actually lived in the Philippines for about a few months, and I gained this amazing community in the food world there. And his name is Chef JJ, had actually invited me to a dinner when I came back in 2019. He invited me to this huge Kamayan dinner. And Kamayan, for people that don't know, we lay out a bunch of banana leaves across an entire table. And there's a bunch of rice, meats, vegetables, all these different kind of Filipino classic dishes that get laid out. And then we all eat with our hands. And that's always kind of one of those special experiences because it forces you to have to put down your phone and interact with people because your hands are dirty. You can't be on anything else except for eating, talking to people, interacting. Anyway, I ended up being at that dinner sitting across from Chef Tom, and we kind of became instant friends. He was in the Philippines for a quasi work trip with the tourism board, and they were filming a bunch of things. They were taking him to the different islands to just kind of learn more about our culture and ingredients. And I was there for vacation with my family, and his trip had ended as my trip was beginning, and he extended. And me, him, and a couple of our friends, and even my parents, we just hung out a bunch of times while we were in the Philippines, and we quickly grew very close. And he told us as he was leaving, because we were still staying on our trip, that you have to come to my restaurant in DC. Let's do this. Let's make it happen. And so that's the context of where this all began, is meeting someone who's also Filipino, is in the same industry as I am, and just connecting on a different level, like in our home country. And fast forward to January 2020, it was my dad's 50th birthday. So kind of one of those milestone markers. And we decided that we were going to go eat at Bad Saint as a family, me, my parents, my brother, and my sister-in-law. And we just made a whole weekend trip. And that meal was special to me for a lot of different reasons. I think at the base level, just being with the people that I love most and kind of enjoying something with my family is one of those big reasons why it's special. Like, I'm in the food industry. Food is part of my job. And I love getting to tell these stories and share with my audience what I'm doing. But it's even more meaningful when I get to do something like that with my family. And then we can taste and savor the experience together. And I remember we walked in to the restaurant and it was very small. So they don't even have a table that's more than 4. But our family of 5 is very tight knit. So we just kind of squeezed in and we got seated. And the whole restaurant has this very cool vibe. There's a disco ball right when you walk in, a little bar where they make drinks with Filipino fruits and things like that. And you kind of see this like open chef's concept. So you see the guys kind of cooking and out, working there. And then there's a bunch of tables along the line. Maybe not COVID friendly pre-pandemic. It was like a very tight-knit space, but we hadn't been in that phase yet. So it was okay. And that the whole night was just incredible. Tom was excited to see us. We hadn't seen each other since we were in the Philippines. And he was just excited to cook. And we ate, I think, every single dish on that menu. We were so very full. And there was things like, so he did a pancit palabok deviled egg. And pancit palabok is a traditional Filipino noodle dish, which consists of like egg, garlic, usually shrimp, and crispy chicharron like bites, which is kind of pork skin. And that's a very traditional type of dish that you serve at almost every single Filipino party or get together. And he took that whole dish and put it into a deviled egg. And it was amazing. Like, my whole mind was just blown that someone was taking something that I grew up with and just elevating it to a level and pushing these boundaries that I didn't even know could be done. But it was still so respectful to our tradition and to our culture, where when I took a bite, I knew instantly, I was like, this is pancit palabok. But yet it's a deviled egg, very thin, kind of crispy layer of chicharron, and then some caviar on it to make it just a little extra luxurious. And I was like, what am I eating right now? But that's how my family and I felt for every single dish. From that to he called it empanada, and it was like Filipinos. We have a lot of traditions also from Spanish culture, which plays into like our overall kind of heritage, which is very interesting. And so we have a lot of dishes that are similar to the different kind of Spanish foods. And he did a version with longanisa, which is sweet Filipino sausage. And I just remember my whole family, every single time we took a bite, we were like, are you kidding me? And it was just so, it's a Filipino word. It's called palinamnam, which has it's hard to completely define it, but it just means super tasty, right? Like you're salivating in your mouth because something is so good. Like everything kind of had that umami quality, and it was out of the box and outside of kind of the traditional comfort zone of Filipino food. And yet it still had that familiarity and that sense of comfort and home. And I think for me, those are always my favorite meals. So Yes, this was definitely one of the best meals of my life. I won't say the best because I hate saying that. But yeah, all of my best meals really do kind of push the boundaries and I feel like are so unique and creative, but still comfort where it's not kind of cold. There's still that sense of warmth and familiarity in them. So yeah, it's the best meal of my life.
Awesome, Caitlin. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Oh man, I totally relate to like every single moment of your experience. I worked in restaurants all through college and then for another 10 years after that. Okay. So what's that? 14 or 15 years or something like that. And it was in New York City. So like I worked at a lot of like top restaurants and Michelin starred restaurants. And my favorite ones were always the ones that could take like the comfort food and just like elevate them. So you feel like you're having a little bit of a fancy experience, but like also I could not make this at home or I wouldn't want to like try to make this at home, right? But it also just really kind of recreates your experience with meals as a family.
Yeah.
Right. And so I love that story of the five of you just being all like scrunched at the table. and I also really love to watch like the kitchen work. Right. I would love to hear a little bit about what led you to like do the work that you do. Mm-hmm. Like what was instilled in you as a kid in terms of food and like how that brought you to your influencer and food and travel journey.
I started Be Fat, Be Happy in college. And it was simply a passion project. I had moved to the city for school and I named this random Instagram page, Be Fat, Be Happy, because I was a chubby kid and I've always loved to eat. And I thought nothing of it, really. I feel like in the beginning, I thought I ended up in this career by accident, only to find out that it really wasn't. And because, like you mentioned, that there are things that just get instilled in your life from the beginning. Interesting story, when my parents had moved out of our childhood home and they were packing things up, just kind of getting rid of old things that we didn't need anymore, my mom found an old notebook from the second grade. I wrote about crab cakes. We had gone to Maryland for the very first time. And that was my journal entry for school in second grade, talking about my first time having a crab cake and how delicious it was. Being around the table and enjoying each other's company and having food be the centerpiece of that has just always been how I've grown up. In a Filipino household specifically, I think a lot of other Filipinos can relate to this. Like we're very food and family oriented. And so it just really has always been the centerpiece, or like maybe not even the centerpiece, but it's been embedded into our lifestyle, right? Like even when all of my friends will come over, if they're not hungry, my mom will still ask what they want to eat. And like, we'll still feed people. It's just like it's our kind of act of service. We love doing it. We love feeding other people. And that's extended into me as an adult, like kind of that idea of hospitality and making connections with other people through food. And so when I realized, like as an adult, why I'm doing this, it's just because that's the environment that I grew up in. It's kind of been this amalgamation of my passions where I love writing. Clearly, I've always loved writing about food since I was 6 years old. What 6-year-old has a crab cake? And that's another piece of it, right? I'm very grateful that my parents let me run up their food bills. My brother, it was a balance. My brother only wanted to eat chicken tenders and I wanted to eat like butternut crusted mahi-mahi. And so that's kind of how we grew up. And I'm very grateful to my parents for fronting that bill and now allowing me to be in the career that I am. And then so it was that love for food, that love for writing, and then that kind of like visual performance art aspect of it. When I was in high school, I went to a performing arts high school and I majored in theater and dance. And I always thought, I want to be a dancer. I want to be in the arts. And so as like a young me, that's what I thought I wanted to do. And then as I got older, I realized I wasn't ready for it. But it's interesting how I've been able to kind of carve out this path that still inserts that, where like I have myself on video, I get hired for camera work now around food and travel and being a host. So I'm really grateful that I've been able to kind of carve out this path with my kind of three passions coming together.
That's awesome. I recently saw on your Instagram that you had a troll.
Yes.
First of all, that sucks. And I'm sorry, but I think that you handled it like really well, and you've been handling it really well. And I'd like people to hear a little bit about that because, you know, one of the things when I was coming up with this idea for the episode was like, I want to talk about food, and there's so many different angles that you can take with food. And you can, you know, talk about food deserts, and you can talk about diet culture.
Yeah.
And so the work that you do is very centered around a love of food and an appreciation for food. And this person came at you with, if you want to tell the story.
I got a comment on March 7th. I had just posted something. I don't even remember what I posted. It was a reel. Oh, I do. It was me eating shrimp at a Filipino restaurant, half fight, eating Filipino food. And they had commented on it saying, eat less. And for me, it's twofold, right? I know that there are internet trolls out there, and I'm not going to let one person or one person's comment define my value or my worth. And so I brushed it off personally. But I just thought it was an important moment and kind of opportunity for me to take this comment that just, it shouldn't exist in 2022. Like, we all have our own bodies and our own right to love and treat our bodies the way that we want to. And next day was March 8th, which is International Women's Day. So I took that comment as an opportunity and I replied to it with a video, and I put together a bunch of different videos of me eating and all of these joyful memories that I've had. And I just think it's so important, right? Like, be fat, be happy. When I realized that it was a business and putting together kind of my deck and my brand identity, the FAT I realized is an acronym for food and travel, and how it can make us all happy and these like kind of universal connectors. But like I said before, I just named it that because I was a chubby kid and I've always loved to eat. And that has never changed for me, in that idea that food can and should bring joy. And we should not be enslaved by societal standards of what we're told we need to look like. And I think it's really sad to me that a lot of people, women and men, feel this need to avoid food in order to look a certain way because they think that looking a certain way is going to make them happy. And I 100% believe like we need to take care of ourselves. And there's that level of do what's right for your health and for your body. At the same time, food is essential to our everyday, and it's not something we can't avoid it. So we might as well embrace it and savor it rather than being enslaved by calories and thinking I need to be this way or this way in order to attain this. And I was overwhelmed by the amount of support that I received and the amount of comments that I got, and like messages from other women saying, thank you, I needed to read that today. Like, I'm going to go enjoy my next meal instead of being afraid of it. So it was really impactful and humbling to kind of see the level of support that I got.
Yeah, thank you. And as someone who has had a history of severe dieting and calorie restriction and done like probably everything from like diet pills back in high school to just extreme dieting, it is really helpful to see just someone enjoying their many foods. And I love food now. You know what I mean? Like, I love food and I'm very adventurous with it and will try anything. So thank you. I'd love to hear from Emily anything that stood out for you in Caitlin's story or that you related to.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many threads, Caitlin. Thank you for sharing. As you were talking about your family and food being an act of service, I think I understood my mom just even a little bit better, right? Like that cooking and providing food is one of her love languages. And I've known that, but I've never really thought about it as an act of service. So that was such a beautiful thing to be thinking about. I love the focus of your work about the connection and about food and travel. My own life, I have the privilege of getting to be all over the world, thanks to my husband's job. And food is one of the first things that we kind of figure out, right? Like, as an expat, you know, going into a grocery store and figuring out how to do my weekly shopping, twice weekly shopping, is always terrifying at first, but then it becomes an adventure. So I'm looking forward to learning even more about what you're doing. And it was so many things, but those were the two that stuck out to me.
Cool. Thank you. I'd love to move on to Emily now. Emily Cornell is a strategist, storyteller, and coach. She's also a wife and mom, living her life in 3 to 4 increments around the globe. She was born in Minneapolis and currently, for now, in Santo Domingo. Emily, whenever you're ready, we'd love to hear about your food experiences.
Well, I should start off by saying that my husband's job has us moving around the world every 3 to 4 years. He works at the U.S. embassies overseas. So we've been living abroad since we've been married. And we're now in Santo Domingo. We've lived in Brussels. We're on our way to New Delhi this summer. And that life has also afforded me plenty of travel opportunities. And so people are always surprised when they ask me what was my favorite meal. And I tell them it was a peanut butter sandwich, an orange, and a Nature Valley oats and honey granola bar. And they don't believe me, but it's true. And that meal is the one that sticks out as the most memorable meal I've ever had. And it's all the way back to when I was a young 18-year-old, summer of 2001. I've just graduated high school and I'm working at St. Mary's Lodge and Resort just outside the gates of Glacier National Park. So that's up in Montana, right on the Canadian border. And the whole reason I ended up there in the first place was because senior year of high school was really rough. My whole family, my mom, my brother, and I had moved to a very small town in Colorado from suburban Denver, my senior year of high school. And it just was a rough year. And so I planned to get the hell out of Dodge when I graduated. And a couple hours after graduation, I got on a Greyhound bus and spent 2 days getting to my summer job up in Montana. And I was by far the youngest person working at the resort. Everybody else at least had a year of college under them and so lost. And so you're like, this was a whole new world to me. I don't know if I was invited or if I invited myself one day to this hike. And knowing me, what probably happened is somebody was like, hey, we're going on this hike. Anybody want to go? And I was like, yes, I'll go. And didn't really think about the fact that it was going to be a long hike, right? So we started off in the morning, parked the car. Well, first of all, we left in the car. You know, you're always like supposed to put your route plan and things like that. And we started off. And the beginning part of the hike went really well. I think there was maybe 5 or 6 of us hiking together. The beginning part went really well. It was one of those robin eggs, blue sky sort of beautiful days. And we're getting up the hills, the mountains. And it's probably 10:30 in the morning when we hit what's called a scree field. And if you've ever been hiking out in the mountain areas, scree is like those really small rocks that make it really difficult to hike. So we look at this scree field. We're like, okay, cool. We'll get to the top of it, no sweat, and then we'll have lunch up on top. Well, what should have been, I don't know, half an hour, easy peasy, ended up being an hour and a half, maybe even 2 of pure misery. Like on our hands and knees, climbing up this field to get to the ridgeline. And finally we did. And that's where I got to have beautiful, yummy, delicious lunch of a peanut butter sandwich, an orange, and an oats and honey granola bar. And I remember like sitting there watching, the mountain goats go by. We're above tree line. It was amazing. And just thinking to myself, great. Okay, we're through the hard part. This is wonderful. Well, because we had lost so much time on the way up the hill, we decided to take a shortcut down the hill. But what you see from the top of the ridgeline is not necessarily what's actually on the ground getting down. And so we found ourselves quite lost in the woods. And when I say quite lost, I mean, again, this is 2001, right? We're not talking like just put your cell phone in the air. I don't even know if any of us had a cell phone on us. We spent the 3 or 4 hours, 4.5 maybe, bushwhacking, tangled up in bramble. A couple of people fell. One gal sprained her ankle. And it was starting to get dark. It wasn't dark yet, but it was definitely to the point where it was like, okay, really glad we put the route map in our car because somebody will come and save us. We did make it down the hill. We got to the trail. I actually got down on the ground and kissed it because it was like, okay, right, I'm not going to be spending the night in the woods. But was very, very hungry because we had not packed enough food for the more than 3-hour tour that we took. And the reason I think that meal was so meaningful to me wasn't just the fact that it was delicious and I was hungry and we had worked up an appetite, but it was because it had not been a good senior year of high school. So I was all about getting out of town, but it made me miss my mom. So my mom is an amazing cook. And the story of my childhood is a lot of times we had to make do with less, but she always managed to pull out these amazing meals that were nourishing and yummy and beautiful. And when we got back to home base that night, all I wanted was just some of my mom's cooking, right? And it still took me a couple months of being totally stubborn to pick up the phone and say, Mom, I miss you. But I think that was like a big turning point of that day was a big turning point of realizing like that even though things weren't necessarily perfect between us and quite frankly would take a long time for them to be much better, I missed my mom. I missed her cooking. I missed her love. And a peanut butter sandwich after really hard work is like the best thing ever to this day.
Yeah, way to get some protein in. Yeah.
Right?
That's awesome. When I was sitting here listening to you, I also wondered, like, did you ever think that was going to be your last meal?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I don't know that I necessarily had the like, but there was definitely the feeling of they're never going to find us. We're going to be lost in the woods, you know? Yeah. And I pack more snacks now when I go hiking.
Yeah. And what I really love is how you came around to talking about like your mom and these meals. And, you know, I heard the acts of service in there that you connected to in Caitlin's story, you know, why she made it a point to make the meals that she did, but also how food can remind you of people in your life because those people made an effort to cook these meals out of love, right? My parents are actually both great cooks. And, you know, my dad is Portuguese and my mom is Puerto Rican. So I grew up with, you know, lots of different kinds of foods. In fact, not really any American foods. The first time I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich was when I met my husband. And I was in my mid-20s. I had never had it before. The first time I had an American Thanksgiving was when I made it myself and I was 32. I think. But still, when I think about food, I think about my grandmother, my father's mother. And I think about this certain like cake that she would make that, of course, nobody has the recipe to, right? And I just think of the ways that they really showed their family how much they loved them and how much they just wanted to like really nourish them in this like very practical way as well. So I just love how it just evokes all of these memories, right? And allowed you to realize at this turning point in your life, like, I miss my mom, you know? It's very sweet. Caitlin, I'd love to hear from you if there was anything that stood out for you in Emily's story.
Quickly, I wanted to comment on the peanut butter sandwich thing is, Rebecca, I'm with you. The first time that I had one was I was in high school and I was on a mission trip serving. So I had to make it for myself for the first time too. But it brings to that point what Emily's saying about like food and memories. And you'll always remember that specific sandwich on that day and related to that. And like Rebecca, you can remember the first time you had that. I can remember the first time I had that. And I think that's really cool. I loved what you said about food being nourishment. I think that's a really great word to use because we talk about it being essential, but also food can be really restorative. And just thinking about like those meals that you remembered your mom making, the kind of connotation and the memories that you have around that, it's really powerful. And I loved hearing it. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I was a really picky eater when I was a kid. So I was probably a lot more like your brother, Caitlin. And then when I was in college and I started working at a restaurant, I had this like really crazy boss. He was in like newspaper and like Page 6 all the time. Very well-known restaurateur. And he used to just like literally shove different foods in my mouth and then not tell me what they were. But what happened was it started to open up my palate. And all of a sudden I was eating like things that my parents were like, what? You wouldn't ever eat anything as a kid, right? I would eat bread. We would go out to a restaurant and eat all the bread at the table. And so I appreciate those people in your life too, that, you know, with Caitlin, it sounds like your parents were very adventurous with food, right? And we're just like, go ahead, order the crusted mahi-mahi or whatever, right? And just allowed you to expand. And I actually gave my daughter, I would start to give her like things that was really mushy at like 4 months old. And now her absolute favorite foods are salmon, broccoli. She's a toddler. Yeah, these are things that like kids normally absolutely reject. So I think it is like really important that we just get introduced to these things, right?
Yeah.
It's just, and that was one of my favorite parts of working in a restaurant too, was just like helping people discover things that they didn't even know that they would like.
Yeah. And even like just like the flavor combinations when you put things together that you wouldn't expect. And yeah, that's amazing too.
I had a couple ones that were celebrating, I think it was like their first year anniversary. And they were like, just order for us. Just give us whatever like you think is best. And I did like wine pairings throughout the whole thing. And it was just like, this is like my ideal. And by the way, that American Thanksgiving, I love cooking it now. I mean, the green bean casserole is not really my jam, to be honest with you. You know, the whole putting a French onion soup or whatever on like green bean casseroles, but like sweet potatoes, all that stuff.
Green bean casserole by scratch this year because...
Wow.
Did you really? Did you like fry the onions and the shallots?
Oh, I did, because finding the ingredients in Santo Domingo for a green bean casserole, and I don't even love green bean casserole, but I was going to make Thanksgiving this year. Like it was going to happen because when you're living overseas, right, you do the things that remind you of home.
Yeah.
So totally. Yeah. I did use frozen green beans.
I think there's a lot of frozen vegetables that are like better than no vegetables, right?
Yeah.
At least that's the way I think about it. And like becoming a mom, it's just like, all right, like I always have to have frozen broccoli and frozen peas. And my daughter actually likes to eat them frozen.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. It's just my 2-year-old thing. I don't know. I mean, like I still cook them for him, but she loved to eat them frozen. Oh, there was something else that I was going to say and I forgot. Oh, yeah, gravy. Never had gravy before.
What?
Like, gravy for like your turkey.
You've never had gravy until you made it yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually not easy to make either, to like make sure that like it stays like smooth and everything.
Yeah.
I guess some people like it lumpy.
With the flour and like whisking it out to keep it.
Yeah. Emily, now that you're like traveling the world, right? Like I would imagine that you're constantly trying new foods.
All the time. And it's
all the time.
It's definitely, you know, whether we're traveling or whether it's just figuring out what can I make and how can I cook. I mean, I choose to try to cook as locally as possible. And so learning new produce or things like that. I mean, when we were in Brussels, it wasn't as hard because it was so similar cuisine wise, but Santo Domingo has been a learning curve for me. So like I learned how to make, really easy, but I learned how to select plantains in the grocery store, right? To know what to look for even.
Yeah. Yeah. What is the hardest meal that you've had to cook? Like where were you and like steepest learning curve?
You know, I think only because it was the first post and because I don't speak French, that first trip grocery shopping in Brussels and trying to figure out how to make the things that I liked without being able to figure out where the heck the chicken stock was. Turns out it doesn't actually, I mean, it does exist, but it's really hard to find.
I want to move on to the rapid fire questions. And what's interesting about it is I made up new rapid fire questions for this season because I knew you all were just going to listen to season 1's rapid fire questions and think that, I'm just going to prepare my answers, which a guest on another episode admitted to doing that. But the first of the new rapid fire questions is what's the best meal that you've ever had? But I'm like, I've already heard this from you guys. So I changed it just slightly. And this first rapid fire question is for Caitlin. What's the craziest thing you have ever eaten?
Filipino balut, which is duck embryo. So you cook the duck egg before it's fully formed, but it's almost a chick. It's very common in the Philippines. They serve it on what we call kanto, or like the corners, street corners. And they serve it very commonly late at night for people that are coming back from work and you need something high in protein, and that's cheap. So it's very common in the Philippines. It's more of a delicacy, I guess, here. And it was very hard to eat and see the little baby chick forming. But I know that it is part of the culture and tradition. So I have to respect it.
Is it within the egg still? Like it's within the white?
Yeah. So basically it's like you're looking at a hard-boiled egg and then you start to peel it. And then there's this kind of like soup that you sip inside, which was actually my favorite part of it. It was like very flavorful. And then you put like salt and vinegar on it and you're just supposed to bite right into it. And there's different stages of it. So mine, I think my cousins were just trying to mess with me and mine had a little bit of a feather. So.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I was not ready for it. I was definitely, but you know, like some people, they love it. My parents grew up eating it. My dad still likes it. So yeah, one of those things.
What about you, Emily? What's the craziest thing you've ever eaten?
You know, I have nothing that crazy, but I think generally speaking, like hot dish, right? You know, with the condensed soup, and even though I said I liked green bean casserole in Minnesota, right, where you take the ground beef and you put the soup and maybe some frozen peas and tater tot. So tater tot hot dish. Like when you think about it, why do people eat it? And yet it's comfort food.
Yeah, no, that is not my jam either. All right. This next question is, we'll start with Emily. What's a popular opinion most people have that you don't agree with?
Oh, going right with the tough ones. I think most Americans think that the ideal is to find a place, settle down, own a home, and stay there for a long time. And that's not one of my values.
Yeah. Yeah. Caitlin, what about you? What's a popular opinion most people have that you don't agree with?
I'm going to keep it related to food. The fact that people think ketchup is delicious is mind-boggling to me. I hate ketchup with all of me. I really don't know. It's just gross.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried, but it's just not my jam.
I think that there's two camps of people, though. Like, you either love ketchup or you hate ketchup. Like,
really?
I do. I have met a few people that hate ketchup. So, like, I grew up in Brooklyn and there's a big Italian-American community. And I think they associate ketchup with people, like, replacing it with, like, red sauce, right? Like marinara sauce. So, like, my husband, who's Italian-American, like, hates ketchup. I'm not going to lie. I am in favor of ketchup.
You are in favor of ketchup.
Yes, but I eat unsweetened ketchup. I just basically I eat tomato puree. Like,
I think you're valid to your opinion.
I put it on weird things too. I'm not going to lie. We're not even going to get into it. But Emily, ketchup or no ketchup? Sounded like you were a no ketchup woman.
Absolutely not. No ketchup.
Wow, we're outnumbering you. This is uncommon.
I am the minority here.
I feel like everyone I talk to loves ketchup.
I think it's another one of those like super American things, right? But I used to put it on my rice and beans when I was a kid. And there was like a divide in my family. There were people that put white wine vinegar on their arroz con gandules, and there were people that put ketchup on it. And my family, and so I was one of those. It is a weird, now that I'm talking about it, it's a weird thing. Moving on. This question is for Caitlin. What piece of art or book or music or movie had a profound impact on you?
My immediate answer, and I don't know why this is my immediate answer, but the book that I'm just going to go with is the Bible. I grew up Christian. I just think about some of those verses that I had to like memorize as a kid. And it's just like one of those like made books that I had growing up.
Yeah. What about you, Emily? A piece of art or music or movie that had a profound impact on you?
I'm going to go with a piece of art that I own. I have a beautiful, it was a graduation present, a college graduation present from my mom. And it's the line from Proverbs, Psalms, one of the two. It's in Hebrew. And it's this beautiful scripture that says, weeping will endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning.
Oh, that's nice. It's really sweet.
It's beautiful. She picked it up somewhere along the way. It's framed art and it travels around the world with me.
Yeah, that's awesome. The next question is for Emily. What's your favorite thing about yourself?
Oh, my favorite thing about myself is also my favorite thing about being human, and that's neuroplasticity. I think it's amazing that humans have this ability to grow and change, and that even if we've been through some really hard things and our brains do things that are maladaptive, we can learn how to change and grow. And I think it's a beautiful thing of the human condition. And I think it's a beautiful thing in my life.
That's awesome. That's really great. Caitlin, what about you? What's your favorite thing about yourself?
How do I follow that answer?
I know. Neuroplasticity. It's like, I'm also super interested in that, but it wouldn't be like the first thing that I think about for this question, right? And now I'm like, my brain is like thinking about all the new grooves that I've created.
We went so deep and related it. It was so true. I was like, I'm feeling this, girl. Preach to me. And then I was like, oh wait, I have to answer that. I think my favorite thing about me is my flexibility. I don't want to be a rigid human in any type of a way. And I think it just allows me to connect better with people when you're flexible, and allows for a more fulfilled and fun life when just being adaptive to change.
Both awesome. Both awesome
hers
qualities.
Is still better.
Stop. It's, they're related though, when you think about it, right? And then Caitlin, I try to go back and forth. Caitlin, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Probably from my mom. She has always told me to shoot for the world, basically, and be amazed at what happens in life. That and I think it's twofold, right? Where we can have a sense of gratefulness and for everything that happens in life, and also because we're amazed by what goes on, and just like having that sense of gratitude throughout your life. And then also be amazed by yourself. Go shoot for whatever it is that you want to go for. and be amazed and watch it when you watch it happen.
I love that. I love this idea also of you could shoot for really great things, and then like the amazing thing is even better things can happen. So Emily, what about you? What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Yeah, similar to Caitlin's, to start a gratitude practice changed my life. To just sit down and jot down at the end of the day or even in the middle of the day things that I'm thankful for really shifted my perspective.
Yeah, really helps with rewiring and creating those new grooves too in the brain.
The coolest thing about Rebecca, her grooves.
My grooves. I've got a groovy brain. Oh, thank you. This was so much fun today. And I also have a really fuzzy, warm feeling right now. And I'm also realizing that I'm a little hungry. So I'm going to go nourish myself.
I'm going to go eat after this too.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you for joining me in the Waystation today.
Thank you so much for having us, Rebecca. This was so much fun.
Awesome.
It was. Thank you.
What a lovely conversation with Caitlin and Emily talking about food. I just really appreciate when people can appreciate food, right? Because as we were talking about, it can be a very complicated issue for a lot of people. It has historically been a very complicated issue for me. And, we forget the simplicity and the real reasons why we eat. And they're not just for we've got to eat a certain amount a day or, a certain type of food in order to sustain ourselves. Like, yes, all that is very true, but food is also love, and food is nourishment, and food is comfort, and it's connection. And, meals are a whole experience, right? They're who you're with, or if you're by yourself eating a peanut butter jelly sandwich on the top of a mountain at a pivotal point in your life, right? There are always memories that we can savor and remember at times when we want to feel that comfort and remember the people who brought us that via food in our lives. So I hope that you enjoyed our conversation today. I would absolutely love, if you did love our conversation today, that you follow the show on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, and even leave us a review. That would be super, super helpful. It takes 2 seconds, and it would really help to raise our visibility for this show that's very near and dear to my heart. And as always, you can follow us on the Waystation socials on Facebook and LinkedIn as the Waystation Podcast, and on Instagram at the Waystation Pod. Thank you so much again for joining us in the Waystation today. I hope you were able to relate. Bye.